You lost all constitutional rights the moment you walked through that door. When the judge sat down there, I sentenced you to 10 years at the Idaho State Penitentiary. You walked in that door, you was a number. And the inmates understood that.
If you're out there and live past the period of being here, just lay down and do it.
Those inmates that were here in the institution during an execution, it had an impression on them that maybe was still with them to some extent. Maybe they don't think about it anymore, but it had an impression on them, I'm sure.
They wouldn't let me out until I get back to stuff. 7 months later, I give it back to them.
That was one of the problems we ran into. You had 5 or 6 guys that were sitting in a place, smoking and joking and drinking coffee. Pretty quick, they'd hatched a plan in there to get under your skin some way or try to figure a way out.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a special stool pigeon featuring geologist Terry Maley. Terry and I connected through the Idaho Museum of Mining and Geology, which is next door to the Old Penn Administration Building on the ground floor of the old prison trustee dormitory. So be sure to check the museum out the next time you visit the Old Penn site. It's amazing, and they just did a bunch of updates over the last couple of years. It looks so great inside. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the General Mining Law of 1872, and Terry, a geologist, has authored 6 editions of the Handbook of Mineral Law between 1977 and 1996. He earned his BS and MS degrees in geology from Oregon State University and PhD in geology from the University of Idaho. He began his career serving 8 years and participating on 15 worldwide expeditions as a marine geologist for the U.S. Naval Oceanographic Office in Washington, D.C. He has published 40 scientific papers and 5 books. Today, Terry is going to share with us the significance of the General Mining Law of 1872 and its impact on Idaho and the West. So welcome, Terry. Thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, we are fortunate to have crossed paths. Like, you are kind of the specialist on this law. And as we were walking up here, you were talking about, oh yeah, I guess it is the 150th anniversary, because when you were doing the history and writing about this, it was the 100-year anniversary. So you've...
Yes, that's one of the startling things to me when you confronted me with this date, 150 years. I realized when I first started that it was the 100th anniversary. It made me feel old that I'd been slogging along with this law for 50 years.
Yeah. Do you think that it's pretty significant, that it's worthy of us focusing on its impact as an agency?
Oh, I think so, particularly in the West. The 1872 mining law applied mostly just to the western states, 11 western states. Yeah. In other words, the far west. It's in Idaho's right in the middle of it, and right up until present day, there's people prospecting, mining, and taking advantage of the mining law to protect their discoveries. So it's it's been timely, and it will remain so.
Yeah. Can you explain what the mining law, what it did, what it was?
Well, before there was a mining law, for more than 200 years, the federal government wrestled with, meaning the Congress, of course, how to dispose of mineral lands. And in 1806, they came up with a scheme to lease lead mines, and then they started leasing. In 1847, they started selling all minerals, and then 1848, 49, we had the California Gold Rush, and people went out there, and there was total mayhem. There were like 20,000 people, and the people wanted the state of California to handle the mining law. You got to keep in mind, when people started mining out there, they just started taking the gold, because most of the deposits were placer gold they were working. The discovery in the gold rush at Sutter's Mill was a placer deposit. So they took this, and they were basically trespassing federal minerals But there was nobody to go after them on this. The major companies or larger companies wanted something that would give them a legal basis for doing. They can't raise money and invest in a property, in a big property, when you're basically stealing the minerals. So there was a lot of interest in getting a federal mining law. But the miners wanted the state of California to administer it rather than the feds. That still continues today. You want government close to you so you can control it and influence it, which is understandable. So what the miners did, they set up all through the West these mining districts where they themselves had officers, and they would come up with schemes to locate state claims, maintain ownership, and basically protect their discovery from somebody else. And so finally, in 1866, the federal government came up with the 1866 mining law, lode law they called it. And they thought all the valuable placers had been mined. Well, they heard about that, so they went back and they passed a law called the 1870 Placer Act. And then they decided to put it all together into the 1872 mining law, where they covered all deposits. So,
how would you enforce this? Would this be at this time with like U.S. Marshals, or are there different sort of law enforcement?
That's an excellent question, because when I started with the Interior Department, Bureau of Land Management, we were part of the work was to regulate claims to some extent. In other words, I was called a mineral examiner. Mineral examiners were to see if examine claims for a discovery to see if they qualified under the mine law. Because the mine law is very explicit that you must have a discovery of a valuable mineral deposit before you locate a claim. But by the time I came along, there were millions of claims in the West, because it costs almost nothing, just a courthouse filing fee, and a lot of people didn't even monument the claims. So all through those years, to go back to your question, from 1872 on, they let the miners administer the law. There was assessment work required, $100 worth of work per claim, and so the federal government basically stayed out of that. That was to protect your claim. If somebody didn't think you had done it, they would take you to a state court and litigate it that way. And so it was only when people wanted to get patents to the claim, which the 1872 mining law provided for, the payment of $5 for loads and $2.50 for placers, you could patent a claim, get fee simple title, absolute title. So people went that way too.
Can you just kind of backing up, just to find a claim, what tools did miners have to locate? Did they have a surveyor or somebody who was a geologist or someone who specialized in this who helped? Or was this kind of a common knowledge trait for all miners to be able to navigate and find and stake their claim?
Well, Anthony, that's an excellent question. And to make your point, I used to give little slideshows on early mining and prospecting, not necessarily the mining law, but I would show a prospector with a gold pan. And it was long called the poor man's method of mining, because if you had a gold pan, which might even be a pie tin, you could recover gold. And there were all kinds of gold pans, basically a shovel and so forth. Now, to locate a claim, you had to do, for a lode claim, you need the meets and bounds survey. For a placer claim, placers, if the claims area had been surveyed by the cadastral surveyors, you could use a public land survey system, like the north half or the east half and so forth. But the courts ruled early on that a miner was not expected to be a surveyor, and so, but they were expected to put monuments at the corners, and so that was the most important thing they could do, is put monuments at the corners and keep them up. Although courts later held that if adversarial claimant destroyed your monuments while you happened to be away, or even while you're there, they were still as good as though they were still erect. So there was, the mining law evolved in many different ways, but as these incidents would come up in court, and a lot of them went clear to the Supreme Court, the courts would rule usually to, as you look back on with hindsight, reasonably well to protect the miner operating in good faith.
What was a typical monument? Was it just kind of a rock on each?
Well, the mining district specified, many of them, not all of them, what what this would be. And most of the states early on came up with a description that it should be 4 inches in diameter, or 4 by 4, and 4 feet high. Oh. And that's the way it is in almost all the states. That's why you see 4 by 4s out there, old weather ones, on the public lands.
Yeah, I could see how there could be a conflict, and we get a lot of people who are incarcerated here at this site and at the territorial prison in Idaho City over, miners fighting over claims and battling over these areas. So
it's interesting that you bring that up, because I've been invited to a number of prisons, Idaho State Prison for one, to give lectures. Uh-huh. And they are always amazed at what a great turnout that I have, because people are interested in this. And I think it goes back to the fact that people don't have anything going for them, and they see this as a chance to go out and find something and be somebody.
Right.
So it's a positive motivation in a way, but that's very true. I've also been told by libraries that my books are the most stolen books from book libraries, and so I don't know what kind of conclusion to draw from that.
That's funny. Yeah, I could see how someone striking rich, off of their own hard work and dedication at a claim, how inspiring that could be to people.
Yeah, it's like winning the lottery in a way. I mean, it's the way they envision it. Uh-huh. And another thing I need to say is almost all of the miners, starting with the California Gold Rush, the people that went out there, and it's the thousands of them, none of them knew anything about mining. They didn't even know how to pan. And you can take a third grader and teach them to pan in about 5 minutes. And some of them are very good and recover all the golds in the dirt. And the reason I know this is because I used to volunteer for Frontier Days out in the schools out in western Boise, and they'd have like several thousand children. And the kids loved it, and they were very good at it, and they just came off the shelf knowing just what to do. Give them a few tips, and they were very aggressive and very cute to watch them do this. So now that's placer gold. Mining for lode deposits takes a little more knowledge.
Yeah. Have you done any mining? Do you have any claims, or have you ever
No, as a federal employee, I was never allowed to. And when I retired, I never had any interest in doing it. My interest is as an observer and watching it as interesting part of U.S. Western history, history of the American West, and watch it evolve and so forth. And now that I'm 80 years old, I've watched quite a bit of it evolve. But no, I've never had a claim. Now, I've spent a lot of time sampling and panning, and I consider myself as good as anybody at doing that sort of thing because I've done it my whole life. But I've done it in the context of sampling for something that's going to go through court, and that everything has to be done perfectly, or you're in trouble. And so, using the most accepted techniques by industry, sampling particularly.
Yeah.
And when I say sampling lode deposits, placer. And another thing about the mining law, when the mining law started, the mine law itself describes veins and rock in place. Everything else is a placer. In other words, material that's not rock in place. Well, that fit the types of deposits we saw at the time. Lode deposits, they were simple veins and stream gravels. But the last 40 or 50 years, we got into disseminated deposits, the no-seam golds, they call them, disseminated copper, gold, and in other words, deposits that had no well-defined boundary, and you couldn't see it when it was there. It was all based on sampling and the cutoff grade. And so this kind of left the small miner not quite understanding the full what's involved, and at a disadvantage to the mining industry that had professional geologists, engineers, metallurgists, and so forth. But that's to be expected. Another thing too, it's very unusual to find a small miner that can make a living anymore from a property just working it himself or herself. So
I'm really curious to know if there are any out there right now.
There are a few, but
Yeah.
they're very few, and there never were very many. Most of the motivation to find something was to sell it to a company or somebody else.
Yeah.
Which is perfectly fine. The law provides for that. You can, a claim is when you have an unpatented claim, it's called a possessory title, but it's real property, and you have a right to sell it, inherit it, or anything else.
Wow.
And of course, once it's patented, if it ever is, and a minute fraction of all claims have been patented. Although if you go around Idaho and the valleys and so forth, you'll see an awful lot of placer patents and lode patents, although there are plenty of them that have been patented and never mined.
You kind of talked about what mining was like in Idaho Territory in the West before the law was passed, and a little bit on the impact and importance of the law on the individual miners. Was it the same for mining corporations? Did they have to?
Another good question, Anthony. The small miners, the mining law, my last text was very fine print and about 1,000 pages, and large pages. And it was well beyond the average mining claimant to understand or appreciate most of it, although they did understand how to locate, how to record the claims. But as far as what constitutes a discovery, which is the basis for your legal title and all that, it was difficult. Now, the industry would have people, they used to call them landsmen, a lot of them were women, landswomen, I guess, and they were professionals. Most of them had degrees and were, very proficient in title work and that sort of thing. So the mining companies didn't want to make any mistakes, because if you did, you could lose your title. And you don't want to spend $500 million exploring a property and then have somebody take it away from you because you forgot to take care of some little technical issue. So, that's a real split between. Now, not to say there are a lot of small miners that understand everything they possibly can about the law and mining and metallurgy, but they're a minority.
Something I've been curious about is how the law, if it did, and how it applied to Chinese miners or miners of...
To be, to get a mining claim, you're supposed to be a citizen, but Chinese miners could locate claims, but they were susceptible to being overlocated by someone that's a citizen. And but there were a lot of Chinese miners, and that's something I don't know. Whether or not how many of them located claims. Most of them, they may have located claims, but they were very susceptible from people taking it away from them. I remember, to give you an example, you've all heard the stories in Idaho and all through the West where people would shoot the Chinese miners and take their gold. And when I was in the 1990s, when my dad was still living, I was talking to him and one of his friends. His friend was in his late 90s, and he said, and my dad told him I was from Idaho. He said, "Well, but have you ever been to Lucille?" And he said, "Yes." He said, I said, "Yes, I've been there, and I've looked and I sampled some of the placer deposits, some of the buried placer deposits." And he said, in the turn of the century, 1900, not 2000, he said, my parents had a ranch, and he said, it was 1912, he said, I remember clearly, and I was looking for some cows. I was 12 years old. He was born in 1900, and he heard rifle shots, lots of them. And he went over the breaks of the canyon and looked down, and he saw these people shooting the Chinese miners that were mining in that Lucille area, and to steal their gold. Yeah. He said he took off, and he said he was profoundly traumatized by that event. He really couldn't believe it. Yeah. He couldn't even speak about it until. So I had no reason to not believe it's true. I know it happened. It's one of the terrible things. So the Chinese miners, one of the things about Chinese miners I've noticed, because I've been to probably thousands of deposits all through the West, and a lot of them Chinese miners have operated in, and they always seem to be very smart about how they mine. For example, in Lucille, they knew, unlike a lot of their Caucasian counterparts, that almost all the gold is on bedrock. They also knew that it didn't make much sense to move any gravel that didn't have much gold. And so they would basically tunnel in at a huge risk to their life because it was unsupported, and just work bedrocks and work the pay streaks under the bedrock. Pay streak is basically a low part of bedrock where gold, being 20 times the density of water, would settle in. And so they would take this out and then put it in bags and take it down to the river and process it. So everywhere they went, they were, nobody was trained like I was, but when you're trained, you can quickly see who was doing it right or had an intuitive understanding of what they were doing as opposed to just doing it, So I thought that was interesting, and that's why the word got around that they were successful and therefore made them targets.
Yeah. Has the law evolved over time?
Yes, it has evolved. It has evolved pretty slowly. Yeah. For one thing, I'll just pick one little area where it's evolved a lot, and that is the test of discovery, because that entitles you to a mining claim. And so when people first filed for patent, they might have something that could never be mined at a profit. And by the late 1960s, you had to be able to show that you could mine it at the present and make a profit. And it had to be more than just a couple handfuls of dirt, too. Yeah, you see, and basically there were a lot of, if you think about it, even back in the 60s and 50s, land was pretty valuable. It was then that in the 50s when the federal government started hiring mineral examiners that were, most of them were experienced geologists and mining engineers to go over these applications to make sure these people had a real deposit instead of just something that was a scheme to get the public land.
Yeah.
Because certain lands back in the 50s and 60s were very valuable. And it was a lot of our work involved people that had, looking at case studies of people that had been salted, and there's a lot of ways to salt somebody when they're testing ore or minerals in a deposit. So,
can you explain some?
Well, one example that was quite notorious was, and this occurred about in the late 1960s. It was a placer deposit. It was in the vicinity of Phoenix, and at that time Phoenix was really starting to grow because it was warm down there, and there was even water, and it was a very attractive, appealing place. And so the land was worth a lot of money, and somebody applied for a patent for thousands of acres. And so these BLM mineral examiners, Bureau of Land Management, went out and sampled and took hundreds of sample sacks. And they knew they had to have security of samples because they were fully aware somebody would try to salt them. And so they had it in a stockade with a big wire mesh fence and so forth, and but they didn't have anybody there. And somebody broke in with a syringe and was putting gold particles in a sample sack. Well, if you understand sampling and so forth, just a little flake of gold can make a sample very valuable because it's supposed to represent a representative value of the property. Anyway, they caught the guy that did it. And so that ended that. But unquestionably, a few of them got through. Yeah. But very few of them, once they got onto the salting problem. So now when they train mineral examiners, they give them, they spend quite a few weeks on working with salting problems and how to maintain security of your samples, so forth, because federal land is the kind they want is very valuable. Yeah. If it's out in the middle of Nevada and it doesn't look like at the time worth $10 an acre, there isn't likely to be a problem with salting.
That makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, we had a previous episode where I talked about a guy named Henry St. Cyr he did surveys on these back in like the 1890s, and we talked a little bit about salting. So I was curious if anything changed. It was the same sort of thing, throwing some dust on that survey and skewing those results.
There are a lot of ways to salt all different kinds of minerals. Gold isn't the only one. Yeah. Although in the early days it was mostly gold, but most of the salting problems were with gold, though, particular placer gold, because it's one of the few minerals that doesn't require a smelter or anything like that. Yeah. I mean, some gold does. It depends if it's locked in sulfides or not. But you can go out and get placer gold and recover something that's very commercial.
Have you kind of been through the whole process? Have you witnessed gold being pulled out of the ground and then being processed? And
oh yeah, that's really what I did for 50 years, at one level or another. Although I was never a miner or anything like that. I've been to most of the mines in the West, and not just been to them, but had tours through them and went down the pit and examined the ore body and so forth. And so there's a cumulative value of looking at literally thousands of deposits that gives you the insights that you wouldn't have if you looked at 5 or 10 or even 100. To me, it was insightful when I started writing about mineral law because I had this experience. And one of the things that always pleased me is that even though I'm not an attorney, attorneys were my biggest fans as far as my book because they liked the insights I had from the technical side of it. They can handle the legal. But the mining law is really a combination legal and technical issues. And if you have to understand both sides of it to really be effective.
It still fascinates me that you yourself never, were allowed to go into mining even with your specialty. Do you think if you ever could have, you would have been a success with your knowledge, or did you ever help anybody?
Most of the good deposits are found by teams.
Gotcha.
Now, not just a single person out there freelancing. There are lots of stories about people doing it, and it has been done, but it's now you just don't have the money or the technology. When I say a team, I mean people of 10 different kind of specialties working together with a synergy that will yield something special. And even then, it's very difficult. It's really a tough way to make money. And so to go back to your question, could I have made it? Maybe I could have, knowing what I know now, I probably could have been 18 in the early 1870s, because another thing, insight I got is a lot of the early discoveries were pretty easy to make. They were like the old native silver deposits. They were just big slabs of native silver sitting out on top of the ridge top, and so I think I could have found that. But there's a huge luck factor, obviously. Not just anybody's going to be able to wander upon those. But, by 1880, every ridge in the West had been walked. Those people were relentless and full of energy, and they were young. So it was never easy. Never easy.
Yeah.
And most of the people that went into prospecting, like I think I read almost a fourth of the gold rush people that went overland died just because they weren't smart enough to stay alive or lucky enough, either way.
Yeah.
So it's a tough business. And the people that make it deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah.
I've always had great respect for the ones I've met that did do it on their own.
It'd be a hard life and a lot of faith that you're gonna find something and make it worthwhile.
That's another thing too. There was always this feeling by miners, and I think by people in other trades, the more work you put into it, the harder you work, the more you'll take out. When it comes to mining, that's only true to a very limited amount. You have to work smart. You have to be in the right place, and you have to do it right. So one of the things I noticed is there's an awful lot of shafts and adits. These are underground workings. One's vertical, one adit is a horizontal working with one opening. That went deeply into the rock. That there was no reason for the miner to do it. A lot of times there was just some alluvial material that was discolored that made it look like a fault. And most of them were thinking I'm following a fault, but it wasn't a fault. They probably spent summer for nothing, working on just digging a big pit.
Yeah. Do you know what kind of tools they use? Like just pickaxe, shovel,
pickaxe and shovels and things like that, and then dynamite when they could get their hands on it. So that was once you started using dynamite, it'd be hard to let it go because it was a lot easier. But primitive tools, very primitive tools. Now I'm talking about early on. Now Now, with the drilling, and you can do horizontal drilling, all kinds, there's portable drills. There's no reason to do that anymore. And so those things, those kind of drills were available by the 60s. And so I doubt if there have been many open pits or adits driven since probably since the 50s. Most of them date back to the turn of the century.
Yeah, man, hard work. Yeah, dangerous work, I imagine, too. A lot of instances.
Yeah.
What got you into geology, and what got you into studying this law in general?
Well, it was the two different answers, of course. Getting into, I was a geologist first. My dad was a notorious rock hound. He loved jasper, and he had the largest jasper collection in the Northwest, and found a number of deposits. And he had 5 children, but he gave me all the jasper because he was afraid the others would just throw it away. I didn't throw it away. I gave it to my son and told him do what he pleases with it. But so anyway, I enjoyed these trips out. So and also I liked the idea of being able to work outdoors in the summer and indoors in the winter time. And so that worked out pretty well. And so when I enrolled in geology in 1960, I never looked back. It was, although it's a difficult career to get a good job in, it always has been. I remember reading Geotimes, the news magazine for geologists, and it said there, in the year I read it, which I think was 1962, this article, it said there are more PhDs coming out every year than there are jobs in geology for even routine jobs nobody would want. So that was not promising. So,
Is this about the time where you started working for the Navy geology group?
Well, as I finished my degree, I decided Oregon State got an oceanography department. I decided I'd like to go to sea. So I became a marine. I got a master's in marine geophysics, and then I got an offer with the U.S. Naval Oceanographic Office in 1965, and I went to sea for almost 8 years, and I got very tired of going to sea, but it was a very interesting time to be doing geophysics at sea, because it was during that time that the theory of global plate tectonics was established. 1968 was the year when the final touches was put on it by a guy named Jason Morgan. So I was doing geophysical surveys, and it was all done with 95% with geophysical surveys, marine geophysical surveys. So it was fun to be a part of that and know a lot of the people that did the work and publish a few papers. Then I decided to go inland because I really missed the West, and this job as a mineral examiner came up. So I was willing to take anything to get out of Washington, D.C. by that time, and I took it, and so that's how I got started. And you start out with a 6-month course in mineral examining, like how to catch people solving claims and that sort of thing. So pretty much stuck with it off and on for the rest of my career.
Did someone ask you to start looking into this 1872 law, or is it just something you felt you needed to do?
No, it was all accidental. I just wandered into it. I have to say, my other career was very deliberate. This one, I was just trying to get out of Washington, D.C. and wanted to get out west, and this put me right out west. And at that time, I, of course, was fully aware of the 1872 mining law because my dad had mining claims, and and I was understood the basics, probably to the degree any miner would. But it's like a lot of things. To understand the mining law is pretty simple. I could give a 5-minute discussion that would explain it all. But to be effectively use it, the devil is in the details, and it takes a lot of time and to grasp all that. And plus the fact it's constantly changing because of the court decisions. And so you could know it one day and, a week later be out of date in certain parts of it. But despite all that, there's certain aspects of it, the size of claims and number of claims, and so forth, the concept of discovery, pre-discovery rights, and location that have never really changed since day one.
Are there things that you wish more people knew about mining in Idaho and the West?
No, I think probably the best thing to know is just get an overview of it and understand. One of the things I've done in the past is given a talk on the role of geology and settlement of the West. Well, most of the miners, people that came out from the East, take advantage of the mining law and find minerals and make their fortune. Most of them, after a month or two, wandered off and did something else and settled down in the West and raised families. And that was how the West was settled, a large part of it. So it definitely influenced what I call the settlement of the American West. And it was part of the migration to the West also, which I find is interesting because I've always had a amateur's interest in history.
It's so amazing how important just having something to draw people out here.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them came out for that reason, or my ancestors all came out on both sides on wagon trains in the 1840s. So they were just trying to get cheap land, which is just fine. That was under the 1862 Homestead Act, which most homesteads, there are, of course, hundreds of homestead laws, but a couple of them, like the Stock Raising Homestead Act in 1916, the 1862 Homestead Act, which is interesting because it predated the mining law by 10 years, but there was an 1866 mining law too, so it came right after that. And there was, of course, 1862 Railroad Act, 1864 Railroad Act. So Congress was really busy passing a lot of laws, and keep in mind the Civil War was going on. 1862, that was right in the middle of the Civil War. So that's the elephant in the room. A lot of interest in getting out of the East, and why not go out and seek your fortune instead of getting eaten up in some military battle.
Well, this has been so insightful, Terry. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share?
I can't think of anything offhand. All great memories for me, though. I always enjoyed every part, particularly anything outside, and always enjoyed working with the kind of people that were doing it, the miners, small miners. They were always great characters. The industry people were the best, a lot of permanent lifetime friends from those people. So it was time well spent. Would I do it again? Probably. But on the other hand, you probably couldn't. Things have changed. There's no longer certain types of opportunities there were many years ago.
You'd still encourage people to go into the field of geology? And
and it's different now. Your specialties, it's much more specialized now, although it was becoming specialized then. But even the training and so forth, and it's there's, as they told me when I was doing it, and I was saying, am I a fool for wasting my time spending years of study, because I ultimately went on and got a PhD. And they said, there's always room at the top. And so that's what you have to tell today's students. My own sons didn't go into that. One was electrical engineer, the other one was a paleoanthropologist. So they picked different fields. And like one of my electrical engineer sons said, he said, just going around with you, Dad, for 10 years, I learned all the geology I need. I always used him as a scale in photographs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But he picked up a lot,
I think as we continue here at the Historical Society this year to study the impact and the importance of this general mining law, we're going to just see more and more of these things that you've been talking about and how important they were to the West and to the Idaho Territory and that time period for about 20 years, 30 years, and today. So, yeah.
Well, one last thing I might add, and that is we were talking earlier about the how I had first gotten exposed to the mining law 50 years at the 100th anniversary, 50 years ago. And the big talk then among a lot of people, particularly environmentalists, was to get rid of the law because there were a lot of negative consequences, things that turned out to be Superfund sites. And but the mine law has proved to be a creature that is still alive and well today. The only thing I can think of that's been terminated was the patenting process. You can no longer patent claims. So in a way that's good, because if you're going to go through the bother of doing it, bad faith is not likely to be part of it anymore if you can't patent it. In other words, all the early salting incidents I was involved in was mostly schemes to get patent to federal lands. They had no interest in mining. They weren't miners. They were just looking for free federal land, which they could resell, and it had been done a number of times. But now that you can no longer patent, and that was stopped probably 30 years ago.
Yeah. Learning more and more about this every day, so thank you.
Again, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for listening. This has been Terry Maley. He's been such an awesome resource already. And all right, everybody, do your own time, do your own number, and we will talk to you soon.
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Not only do we get to hear your feedback about the show, but it helps others find us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in today's episode, follow our Facebook group at Behind Gray Walls Podcast. We have a podcast Instagram as well. You can find us on Instagram at Behind Gray Walls Pod.